Welcome to the Audio Description Network Alliance. Today, we're very happy to have a special bonus episode with Antonio Jose Pineros. Thank you so much for joining us, Antonio.
Thank you, Roy. It's an honor, really, to be interviewed by you. This is great.
Oh, I can't wait to get in. Let's jump in with our favorite question: what you love about audio description?
Sure. What I love about audio description, I guess, as an audio engineer, and I love being part of the process of audio description because it gives access to, the visual impaired to experience any kind of visual content. So it's cool to know that you're doing something that matters and that's inclusive and it's for others. But I think also I love that it's not just for the visual impaired, I find. I think that you don't have to be blind to enjoy AD. You can just have it while driving, I suppose, or maybe moms that are, cooking or something that can't be watching a screen. Or maybe even if you are watching the screen, I think that good AD really adds to the visual. And it can sometimes even be like a guide, for like complex stories or shows with like crazy timelines and stuff like that, or bunch of characters and stuff. I remember like earlier this year when we were recording the AD for Game of Thrones, I recorded most of it, and the script was phenomenal by Dakota Green, and Emily's read was also super cool. So I mean, I was late at watching Game of Thrones. Like I started watching it like maybe 3 years after everybody had already, watched a few seasons. And I was late into the game. And then I didn't really get into it too much. But when I was recording it, I was like, whoa, this AD is actually letting me understand a lot more than what I picked up the first time I started watching it. So after I recorded it, I didn't mix it myself, but I went back and watched it with my wife with the AD, and it was amazing. It was just such a cool experience to feel like you fully understand the whole show. You understand who's who, the names of the characters and where they are and all that. And it just really added to the experience of watching it. So I really think that it's not just for the blind. Oh, another one that was super helpful for me to watch with AD was Dark. I guess maybe a spoiler alert on that one, but Dark is such a cool, complex show. But with the AD, you get it, you understand it. It helps you just tie in the whole story together.
Great examples there too, with the understanding and adding to the visuals. I loved how you shared those specifics. If we could go into the experience, that's one of the first things you mentioned about what you love about AD is the experience as an audio engineer. I think a lot of people are still understanding audio description in the sense of, oh, it's a voice.
Right.
As we know, and as we explore so much in this podcast, the very many roles that are played within audio description. Could you talk a little bit more about your contribution as an audio engineer to AD?
Absolutely. So I didn't know about AD until about 5 years ago when I moved to New York. I was living in Colombia before, and I moved to New York, and I was looking for a job as an audio engineer. And I did a lot of post-production work for TV commercials and voiceovers, jingles, and that type of stuff. And when I got the job at IDC, I started straight away doing audio description for Spanish shows, actually for Colombian shows, for like Colombian novellas that are like 60 episodes long at least. And, you have to have, first of all, a really good writer that can watch and understand, the whole content in the program and really get the essentials that need to be described also in the space that they have to do it, which is super difficult to do. I mean, the writers are like the most important thing, I think, in the whole process. They really have to get the script right, the things that really matter, and make it so that it fits, or at least try to make it fit in the spaces. And of course, you have the voiceover actor that needs to, interpret that in a way that it's nice and clear and not too, it can't be a protagonist, it needs to be able to sit in the show. And my job as the engineer is to kind of put all of that together. So I can do a good job as an engineer if the writing is good and if the read is good. So I get to contribute sometimes in editing things because sometimes, maybe some line is just too long. So, I need to figure out how to, make it shorter and make it so that it makes sense. It's definitely a creative process, but it's a team effort for sure. And as an engineer, to put it all together, it's really cool to be able to make it fit, so that it doesn't stand out or so it's not buried in the mix. And yeah, I mean, I just put everything together and try to make it seem so that it's actually part of the program. It's challenging at first, but once you get to do it a few times, it gets easier as you do it. And it's really cool being in the engineer seat through this process, because you're kind of like the last hands that it goes through. So you have to make sure that it's clear, that there's no like clicks and pops, that it's not dirty, or that the breaths aren't too loud, or maybe even just cut the breaths. Sometimes you have to cut breaths to make the sentences even shorter so that they fit. So yeah, it's cool being an engineer for the whole audio description process.
I love how you shared all the different elements that are included, as well as making sure that the project, the AD project, is part of the program. And you
Sure.
specifically saying not stand out or buried. I've used the example of turning the volume up and down, fiddling with the volume, that what you're sharing is like so much clearer. So, uh, could you talk a little bit maybe about the difference between your post production work on commercials or working with voiceover, and how that's different than AD, or maybe how it's the same?
Yeah, it's very similar in many ways. Of course, when you do voiceover for, TV commercials or advertising, a lot of the times, well, obviously it depends on the tone of the commercial, but a lot of the times it's, a very promo thing, and the voiceover actor has to have, like this energy, and you have like 10 seconds or 5 seconds or 20 seconds, that you need to capture people's attention. So voiceovers for this type of stuff needs to be, captivating in a way, so they have to have, certain energies and certain tones that do that. And for AD, not so much, although I do think that it is important to have a proper tone according to the show. But most of all, it has to be calm and even keel tone. And that's sometimes hard for voiceover actors to get into. And so, it's part of also my job is to help them, get into that sort of mindset to not overact or not sound completely monotonous. It's definitely different in that sense, that you need to have the right tone for AD.
Very cool. And it sounds like that performance that you're capturing. We've used the example as a high wire act, that it is a very deliberate performance that makes sure that it matches you're using the word tone. We talk about intentions, of bringing intent to the work and making sure it's not, the same way that I'm sure you've experienced in voiceovers outside of AD, that it could be a level 10 out of 10, that it's definitely got to fit. And that fitting, if it's too less, it sounds horrible. And if it's too
Yeah,
much, it sounds horrible. And I think that really parallels well with what you were saying about the not standing out or buried, that
absolutely.
example of not standing out or buried in your sense, as far as the sound goes. I'm wondering if you see a parallel with the writing and in the performance of the narrator.
Yeah, I mean, it's being able to interpret what the script is and making it so that it matches the program. It's a skill, and not everybody gets it, and you need to work on it. But it's fabulous when people do get it, and when they give the right performance. It's great to be able to get it right. Like the last projects that we worked on, I think you had Suri earlier, and the AD that we did with her. Well, we do tons of AD with her. She's so good. And she's one of those people that really get to interpret it right. And the skill that she has about doing it like on the go, cold reading, is amazing. Of course, you stop and go back and say, oh, wait a second, I maybe read that. I gave that a little bit too much. Maybe let's, lower it just a tad, or hey, you know what, that maybe needed to sound a little bit sadder because of what's happening, so let's go back and do that. It's a team effort, man, and to be able to do the whole thing right and to get it right, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times.
Very cool. Thank you for that answer. Let's talk a little bit about making it right. Could you share an example of something that you're really proud of, a challenge that you solved or fixed or made work, Without asking any details, or if you want to go into as many details as you want, is there anything in general or specific you could share?
Every show has its own challenge. Initially, for me, my challenge was not to make it sound too jarring of the volume going up and down. So you need to have a lot of control. And when I first started mixing AD, I would mix in stereo first. So I would get the stems, the stereo mix, and mix the AD to that. And I found that by doing that, the jumps in volumes would be sometimes too aggressive, and it would just take your attention out of it, and it was just jarring. I then switched to mixing in 5.1 first and then down folding it to stereo. I don't know if this is too technical, but basically when you mix in 5.1, you have more control of the sound in general, because usually the dialogue goes in the center channel and you have the music and effects. Well, actually effects usually also go in the center channel. The music and the ambience goes, on left and right. And the surrounds also have some slight effects, some background noise. And being able to control all of those channels, you can make for the AD to mix in a better way. So now when I started mixing in 5.1, I had the chance to control the music more, like from the beginning of the scene, when I knew that there was going to be a lot of sort of like starts and stops, that usually the music would just be going up and down, up and down. I would just bring the music down for the entire scene from the beginning. And that way you don't feel that when the AD needs to pop through, that the music is just dipping in order to allow the AD to cut through the mix. So things like this really, really helped and made the mixes way clearer and just more pleasing to hear. So that was definitely a challenge that I was able to overcome by just mixing at 5.1, mix always in 5.1 in surround, and then you can translate that into a stereo mix, which is going to sound the same. I mean, on just in the two speakers, but it's already going to have that control from the 5.1 mix. So that's great, being able to do that, because Squid Game, we were able to let the sound effects cut in the moments that they needed to. Sometimes the AD describes, he twists somebody's neck, whatever character twists somebody's neck, and then you want to hear the click, so stuff like that, being able to let it cut through is essential. It's really, really important to be able to make that happen. Every different program has its own challenges.
That's great with the lead original audio coming through. What also that's implying to me is that when AD does come through, the audience, whether they're listening to audio description or without audio description, they're going to have a reaction at the same time, whether it's laughing at the
Yeah.
same time or crying or being surprised if it's a jump scare, whatever that is, that's something that you are also in charge of, beyond how quiet or soft or loud or just perfectly matched. That you're, if we could talk a little bit about editing, could because so far we've talked a little bit about the volume, the like how
Yeah.
loud it is for the audience's experience. Could you talk a little bit about the timing? I'm sorry, that was such a bad dad joke. Could you talk about the timing with the pause? We got to cut that. Anyway, could you talk about timing?
Yeah, sure. Timing is also super important. You really get to get involved with the timing of the AD when there's space for it. Sometimes there's no space for it at all. Sometimes you just got little moment where you have to describe something. So what's the timing of that? There is none. You just fit it in where it's supposed to. But when there's not so much dialogue and you're describing long scenes that don't have dialogue, and you really have to pay attention to the timing. The way I do it, I watch it and I place it where I feel it needs to be. And if it felt like it was too soon, I move it, and I rewatch it again. And if that felt right, then it felt right, and just move on to the next one. And again, always keeping in mind the sound effects, you want to let those through. So sometimes it's, the characters going through like a dark house, opening doors and, switching on flashlights and like all these things. So you're describing all of that, but you also want to hear the doorknob or the door creaking or the flashlight switching on. So yeah, that's when you really have to pay attention to the timing. So first of all, not to step over those effects. And second of all, is to make it feel like it's normal, that it makes sense, not that you're giving something away. Sometimes you're describing like, yeah, he turns on a flashlight and then you hear the flashlight on. I find that most of the times that's fine, that it makes sense. Being able to describe before the sound effect, it's a lot about how it feels, and if it feels right, it's probably right.
Great, great sense there. And that sense that you have has got to come from all your experiences as working outside of audio description. Do you find that your contribution in audio description, I mean, just from having the experience, just the way that you've shared these moments of the interview, that has got to be able to support other things that you've done in post production too. Do you find that they feed each other as far as your craft goes, in the sense of audio description by itself versus audio description? And I don't want to segment it, I don't want
Right.
to. That's not really fair to either of us. But I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that. And it's kind of like the same question I asked earlier.
What I do outside of AD, I make electronic music. So yes, timing, for example, is very important. When you want to introduce a certain sound or a certain effect or something, it's super important, especially in electronic music that's so repetitive and kind of puts you in a trance. So you have to be very careful about when you introduce a sound and when you take it out. But yeah, they're totally different things. One thing is music, and another thing is AD and a show with dialogue and effects and music, and it's a different experience.
And bringing it back to your experience in electronic music, and you use the word trance, that our experience for our audiences, I think all of our roles in audio description is to make sure that our audio description audiences are immersed in the story. And that's a word that keeps being shoved down people's throats or given, depending on the perspective. But that immersion seems similar to trance, that there is something that you can get people into a flow, whether they're listening to your music or whether they're watching a TV show like Game of Thrones or Squid Game or any of the other great examples that you've named, that we can keep that flow going, and you've contributed to it. I have to ask another question, where you see audio description headed.
Yeah, that's a great question because I definitely see a lot of potential for it. I think that, again, since it's for me, I don't think it's just for visual impaired. I think anybody can experience it. I don't know. It could be it, like, let's say if Netflix created another category of just audio description for you to listen to, there's definitely more that can be done with it, like radio novels or something like that. Like that's kind of like what AD does, it allows you to experience these shows in this way. And yeah, maybe if there was like this category of just audio description, I think I'd subscribe to it. I mean, my mom, she loves to listen to audiobooks, and I put her into audio description. I was like, hey, check this out. And she turns it on and she's, doing stuff around the house, and she's, listening to the AD. So I just think more people need to know about it. And I think eventually it'll catch on, it really is a great thing.
I'm putting you on the spot with this question. I'm curious about your experiences working with blind or low vision talents of any kinds, whether it's the editors, the quality control, the voice talents, or maybe even other engineers. What's your connection with working with people who are blind or low vision?
So I personally haven't had the experience yet of working one-on-one with a blind person or visually impaired person. I know at IDC we've had some narrators that are blind, but I personally haven't. My experience with blind was I went to St. Louis a few years back to the ACB conference, and I was able to talk with some blind people there and ask them about AD and what they felt about AD and what their thoughts were about it. And I was able to get really cool feedback from them there that allowed me to be a little bit more free with the AD. And I'm not a writer, but I would ask him things like, do you mind if we mention colors or emotions? because kind of like in the rule book of AD is that you shouldn't really, you should be more objective, and how can you, talk about emotions and things like that. But when I would ask them, they always said that they love it, that they really like when they talk about if somebody's upset or something, like that the AD sort of in a way mentions it, or colors also were very welcome to them. They liked it. So that was a surprise to me, but also not so much, because I also felt that when you incorporate these things into the script, it just makes it more human. And I think that's super important. So that's really the only time that I've been in contact with the blind community to sort of, maybe just get some of their feedback that I ended up just passing along and pushing too, with some of the projects that we work on, especially in Spanish too. Just trying to tell them, hey, let's try to, maybe give it a little bit more flavor, see what you can do. I mean, I'm not a writer, but see what you can do. So when we come to recording, and I do get my hands a little bit on the editing of the script sometimes, as I mentioned earlier. And if I can there, maybe I can, alter something here or there to just make it more human. That's my thing. So yeah, that's really been my experience with the blind community so far. I'd love to, work with a blind narrator to record them, and I'm sure it'll happen. We're doing so much work all the time that sooner or later it'll happen for sure.
Thanks for sharing all that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to let our audience know?
No, not that I can think of. I just I love that what you're doing, exposing this a little bit more, getting this work out there, and I just wish more people caught on to it, because it's a great thing. It's a great way to consume content. I think so.
Very great. And how can we follow you, either on social media, websites, any contact info that you could feel comfortable sharing?
My LinkedIn, you can find me there, AJ Pineros. Also, Instagram, it's at AJ Pineros. That's about it. I'm not really active, but you can send me a message through any of those two. I'll probably respond.
Very cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again for joining us, Antonio. This has been great.
Thank you, Roy. Awesome.